So the globe is marking International Workers' Day, which is set aside to shine a spotlight on the long and painful history of labor injustices in the sector. So let's take a moment then to reflect on the impact of deteriorating buildings and what impact that has, I beg your pardon, on the workers' conditions. And for that, let's bring in our guest, the Public Servants Association's General Manager, Reuben Maleka, who joins us now via our telephone line. Mr. Maleka, it's great to have you on. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Whether it's a Home Affairs building, the SAPS, we've seen in some instances the country's courts quite literally falling apart. We have a long list of examples that we could refer to that really do raise questions about some of the conditions that government workers in particular find themselves in. Let me just start by getting a sense from you of how concerned you are as the PSA about that.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Ayanda, and the viewers at home. Firstly, the PSA has been in the forefront of advocating for occupational health and safety, especially in the public service. We have been engaged in this project since 2018. You recall the Johannesburg building that was the first incident. From there, we have actually taken initiative to say that each and every workplace in the public service requires attention, and we have been engaged with the Department of Employment and Labor, the labor inspectors, to ensure that they conduct the inspection of all government buildings. It's unfortunate that most of the government buildings have collapsed. Actually, you have seen with the Gauteng department now that most of all of their departments are actually renting private and they've left their own buildings. And that tells you a story that everything combined point to the issue of crime and corruption. And if we don't arrest crime and corruption in the public service and in the society in general, we will never have and will never be able to resolve the issue of dilapidated buildings, collapsed buildings, and infrastructure in the public service. So the other main factor that we believe and we've been advocating is the issue of the regulation of scrap metals. The recent school that got banned is a classic example of saying that if we don't arrest the issue of scrap metals, which we know that many of the buildings, for other reasons, they might have banned, but in this instance, this one is attributed to the fact that people choose to go and vandalize schools and other government buildings in search of copper, in search of all metals within the buildings. And that causes fire, and that is why we've been saying that there must be regulations of how metals are being sold in this country. Everybody else sells anything, anytime, and it's acceptable.
Yeah. You know, having a building fall apart isn't something that happens overnight. And in my mind, there should be someone in charge at the very least of the maintenance work of these government buildings. And those are the individuals, perhaps, who should be answering the questions. From where you're sitting and given, I suppose, your activism, what are you finding has led to that negligence? Because that's essentially what it is over the years, to a point where, as you mentioned, government has had to abandon its own buildings in order to rent in the private sector.
First of all, is the collapse of the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, because that is actually the core function of that particular department. And the tenderizing of each and every project. I want to give you a practical example. One, in many of the state departments, even the hospitals, a simple thing of replacement of a globe, a replacement of a door, requires a tender. Why must every detail and every small thing that must go through a tender? And we call upon that the public works must be in the center stage of making sure that government buildings are maintained, government buildings are in a safe condition. But we can see that has been abandoned. We're not, actually, nobody can tell you where is the Department of Public Works, because they've actually abdicated their responsibility to departments, and departments does not have capacity. That is why everything must go through a tender. And we know that the crime that is happening within the tender system, the extortions that we find that even if it's a small project that requires somebody to do something else, there's already extortion within that particular project. There's already the backhand that must happen in that project. So what becomes the loser is actually us as public servants, and in fact is the ultimate end of that. That money that's supposed to have been spent to revamp a building cannot be spent for that for that purpose, because there's somebody that must exert the money. There must be somebody who must get the backhand. So ultimately, if there was 100 rand to be spent, 80 rand goes into the pockets of people, and the little money that is left of 20 rand will be spent on something that was intended for. And that is why we are against the tender system. We are saying public works must be restored and must be able to render this particular service without a tender process.
Well, the Public Works Minister, that's Dean McPherson, is being quoted in articles published last month saying that he's planning to create a state-owned company that will essentially manage the government's portfolio and hopefully attract investments from the private sector. Does that sound like a solution that would work?
We have seen, and it's been proven, that what departments, when they fail, they create some entity or agency called something that must do something. And we have realized that that becomes a more relevant vehicle for stealing. It's a more relevant vehicle for corruption. And that is why, I don't know, I'm sure everybody else through social media can see it. We are all aware what is happening in other countries, such as in Burkina Faso, where the president took a decision that the government work must be done by government. And reports are showing that government that is willing is capable of doing. But if there's no will, then there will not be any outcome. So it's a question of the will. If ministers who are responsible are willing, and the president is holding them to account and give results, because everybody else, including us, we've got performance targets. If the president says to you, this year I want all department, 80% of government buildings to have been revamped, to be in a state where they can be able to function within 12 months. And if after 12 months the minister comes there is not able to deliver, there's a good reason for the president to remove that minister. But we do not believe that there's such accountability. We do not believe that the president is holding his ministers to account. And in any event, ministers that are too many, the whole thing of even deputy ministers, everybody's just there, and we don't know what they're really doing. And that is why we're saying there must be the willingness of the president and his ministers to deliver, and they must have a kind of targets that they are held accountable. And if they are incapable of delivering, they must be removed.
There's going to be a number of messages sent out to workers today. As you've heard, there are a number of rallies being held around the country. What becomes then the message of the PSA, given these issues that you've just highlighted?
The message to the workers in general is that workers must unite, workers must ensure that they belong to trade unions, because what we have seen is a trend of workers' abuse, is workers who decide not to belong to trade unions, and when they're in trouble, they realize that they should have joined. Because we have also experienced that there are more general tendency of violating the workers' rights, including the very right that I'm talking to, occupational health and safety. Many of public servants, they are not aware that they are living in conditions where by the time they go to retirement, they might halve their life expectancy, because they are living in conditions that are not supposed to be. Dirty places that are very unhealthy to their lives. So we call upon each and every public servant, a worker in general in the whole society, including you, Ayanda, belong to trade unions, ensure that your rights are advocated. We stand strong as the PSA to advocate the workers' rights and protect them. And we are not apologetic about that. And that is why we say this year, 2025, every employee, casual worker, and anybody look for trade unions so that they can strengthen their rights and able to experience and actually live the rights of workers, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Occupational Health and Safety, and all the labor rights, because they're all there. And that has been achieved over a period through the sweat and the sacrifice of workers. It's time to enjoy the rights by belonging to trade unions.
All right, I suppose the workers will ultimately decide. Reuben Maleka, thanks very much indeed, as always. Reuben is the General Secretary of the Public Servants Association.